One problem we have when we're travelling is when we do bigger events, they never make enough toilets for everybody to go. In Portugal, it was all like
down the bushes. Might raise a few eyebrows.
Yeah. Hard to get used to shoes as well, isn't it? Pants and shoes. So used to shorts and thongs. We call them thongs in Australia.
Yeah, you can't call it thongs.
I can't call them thongs.
Flip-flop. That's what you call it.
And pants is underwear.
And pants is underwear.
Pants is underwear.
Trousers.
Trousers.
Trousers and flip.
Pardon my faux pas. Yeah.
Is there many left, Nelly, in the loop?
Yes,
Yeah.
A few, yeah. We'll just wait. Yeah, I bought these shoes especially for the trip. It's the first time I've bought some shoes for about. I didn't have any shoes, so, so I bought some for the trip because I knew it might get cold.
I do like them.
You like them?
I like them. I look tidy, do I? Tidier than normal.
Very smart.
The shoes are not high on the agenda. It's almost 6, I think. G'day. Well, 10, 9, and 8.
Now, I was thinking about mic runners, because I think it's best if you choose a side. Just
Front of that's fine.
front of that?
Yeah, front of
Well,
I
see how you
think
go.
we already chose.
From the first 4
You got
rows.
it sorted?
Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
No
All
worries.
right, we'll see how it goes, hey? We'll see how it goes.
Fire away, guys. We're at your disposal. Not that we want you to dispose of us. So we start here, thank you. When I point to you, if you leave your hand up, that'll help our mic runs. Yep.
But you've just broken the first rule, Bex, of giving the mic to someone before you take them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, and name?
Hannah,
Hannah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
hi. How does my emotional experience educate me about God's laws?
All right, well, let's probably the best way to answer that, Hannah, is to. This is something that we've had to do at a lot of the groups we've been at so far, is to explain a bit about the human soul and how it works. Because it's very important to sort of understand God's design of the human soul versus your bodies. So as you might have seen me draw before, the human soul is a complete unit. And in your case, you've got a male attraction, right? So your soul looks like feminine and masculine qualities, and there's sort of half of your soul is very dominantly feminine, the other half of the soul very dominantly masculine, right? When you incarnate, you've seen me draw these things before, probably. Yeah. You've got your 2 bodies, and those bodies are created at conception. So you've got your spirit body and your physical body. They are genetically created through the process of your parents having sex and conceiving, and then of course these 2 bodies are created at that time. And the genetic structure is very similar, because if you pass into the spirit world, you want to be able to recognize yourself. And so when this body is no longer being used, this body, you want it to be recognizable to yourself. Imagine if it wasn't like that. It would be like a shock when you pass, wouldn't it? Who's this person I see in the mirror type of thing. Whereas the beauty of them having the same similar genetic structure means that you can recognize this is me still, right? And of course, the other half of the soul goes through the same incarnation process. So, you can see from that diagram, can't you, if you look at it, it's quite fundamentally basic to see that actually this is the real you. Right? The soul is the real you. The bodies you're in are just, what did one person in Australia call it? Flesh suits. One's a flesh suit to use in the physical world, another is a flesh suit to use in the spirit world, right? And in the spirit world, there are dimensional spaces right up to the 36th dimension, 35th actually, where this body is useful. And it's useful because the soul has yet to become fully aware of its own capacity as a full soul. And until it becomes fully aware of its own capacity, it's really using half of the soul. Each half is using half of the soul to express itself. So you're using your feminine side of yourself and the two bodies you have to express yourself. If you think about it too, in your sleep state, when you sleep, say 8 hours a day, you're expressing yourself in your spirit body then. Your physical body is left on your bed, hopefully you have one, and you rest, and at rest, and the spirit body is utilised in the spirit world to express yourself there. And so not only do you get an educational process in terms of how to use your physical body through its senses. So remember, this physical body has senses, doesn't it? So you have a sense of touch, taste, smell, hearing, sight, and you're absorbing everything around you through these senses. So too your spirit body has senses, a superset of those senses. It has other senses in addition to sight, smell, hearings, and those kind of senses. And these senses allow you, when you're in your sleep state, to experience spirit life and to get educated about spirit life. Right? So those things are happening all the time. But every experience is being referred as a sort of you could say, channeled or referred back to the soul. Every experience. So every experience goes into this soul, which is what you really are. Now this soul, when it began, was not self-aware, but as soon as it has these bodies created, it begins the process of self-awareness. So it's now becoming aware of self. So that's one of the things that it has to do. And the other thing that it has through this process, it's aware that it's an individual. So it's aware the individualization process has occurred, where you're becoming aware, I am Hannah, whatever Hannah means, which is really, if you think about it, the sum total of your experiences, isn't it? And every experience comes through this process, through the bodies, through the senses of the bodies, and into the soul. And it creates responses in the soul. So in other words, you're looking out on a beautiful view, you're sitting down in a nice, park garden, let's say, looking out a beautiful view, there's no traffic, no aeroplanes going overhead to distract you, and you're just absorbing the view, you're looking out on it, you're not only having your sensory experience, but now you're having emotions starting to flow in you, aren't you? It's sort of like, oh wow, this makes me feel happy, so it might be an emotion. Makes me feel peaceful or serene or content or tranquil. These are all other emotions. You might feel the energy of the tree that you're sitting under or whatever, and you'll feel that and you think, oh, this feels regenerative. It feels like I'm getting healed even, you have those feelings as well. So now from the senses, and you remember now you've got your physical body senses and your spirit body senses, and also there's soul senses, of which your emotions are a primary part, are all now going through this sort of total experience, immersive. You sort of feel immersed in it. It's the same feeling that many of you feel when you might go swimming or something like that, where you're in the water and it's a warm day and the water's comfortable, not freezing cold, and you sort of feel this water against your skin and just relaxing with it. and particularly if it's a hot day, you feel relieved from the heat. So you're having this immersive emotional experience. And God designed you to have immersive emotional experiences. That's the point of life, actually. One of the, happiness can only come from a collection of immersive emotional experiences. So your emotions are a part of the soul's function for you to be able to measure your experiences and to work out whether you enjoy them or you don't. So if you're having an immersive experience but it's terrifying, obviously you're not going to enjoy that. But if you're having an immersive experience and it's like happy and joyful and peaceful and calm and serene, then you're probably going to enjoy that. So you could say the soul, through the aspect, so the question you had was about emotion, right? See what it's doing with your soul. So the soul experiencing emotion and using emotion to assess your immersive experiences that are happening in your senses, your sensory apparatus, your bodies, and even your soul has its own senses that are not included in these bodies. That emotion is what generates, you could say, your response to your experience. So it creates these experiences, of which you remember, because you've got your memory, which is also in your soul, and you remember them. It's not. It's interesting that a lot of people feel their memory is in their mind, but actually the intellectual memory is in your spirit body's mind, but all of the emotions associated with your memory are all stored in the soul. So your soul actually remembers everything, right? And your spirit body's mind really is the way in which the soul expresses itself emotionally through the two bodies. And the physical body's brain is mostly performing the physiological functions that your physical body needs to live and survive. So in other words, your physical body brain tells you when to breathe, when to eat, when to sleep, when to evacuate, when to, do all of these basic functions. And also it passes experiences through the oral and the sight, the ear, the hearing, and all of the other sensory apparatus of the physical body. It passes them through a cord into the spirit body. So the spirit body's mind can process them as well. And then that passes them through. This all happens instantly, passes them through to the soul, and the soul remembers the experience. So the emotional part of your experience is by far the most important part of your experience, because without it, you wouldn't be able to choose what is lovely to experience and what is, unpleasant to experience. And it is true that each of these bodies do have, you could say, physiological functioning that allows for emotion to be generated through the experience. So an example is in your brain, you do have some chemicals actually that work, that as you might eat a food and you have the feeling of elation eating that food. And so that experience of, that food is lovely to eat, even though it might be bad for you, like sugar or something like that, will cause you to remember that. And then depending on the injuries that the soul has emotionally, it'll say, I'm going to keep doing that, even if it's bad for me. Things like that. So these bodies are basically sensory apparatus that God created to allow you to create experiences, of which all of the experiences will have a large emotional component. And the emotion is actually stored in your soul and remembered by the soul, so remembered by you, so that you can either repeat the action or you can say, that wasn't very nice and I really don't want to do that anymore. That kind of decision-making process. So now let's go back to your question. So let's, if you can say your question again.
Just leave the mic with people
Just
until
leave the mic
Jesus
with
has
people.
finished answering the question, Doug.
How does my emotional experience educate me about God's laws?
Right. Can you see now, because you're having an emotional experience, when the emotional experience turns out in the long term to lead you to some pain or suffering, It's already educating you, don't do that. And if the long-term experience that leads you to a point of pleasure and bliss, your emotional experience is saying, do that more, right? So without this emotional experience, I would not really be able to determine what I should, like how I should act in the future, and also would not have memories of joy or sorrow about the past, right? And it's important to be able to have memories of the past as well as desires for the future, all of which must be emotionally experienced in order to be enjoyed or to have value, right? So the emotional experience is a very important part of your way of determining whether something is lawless or not. It's like, how do you feel about it is a very important thing. Now, of course, our feelings can be distorted, can't they? Which is the real problem. It is sort of like a child, for example, has its first taste of a candy and goes, I like that. It doesn't even say I like it. You know, it can be 2 years old. It's like, give me more of that. You know, there's just this feeling of I like that the child, and then the child recognises they got that eventually from store shopping. It's like every time you go past the shop, the candy aisle, you give up because it equates that the sweet taste with something good, right? Of course, at that stage, it doesn't know that it's actually bad for it, does it? And that requires a bit more analysis in terms of time to see what are going to be the results. Now, you as a parent go, if you keep eating that candy, you're going to end up with no teeth, you know, a very probably sick system in terms of your system that's going on. And also, why is it that the child feels inclined towards the candy and not inclined towards an apple, which God actually created for it as a sweet thing to eat? So if you look at what God created for sweets, what are all the sweets God created?
Fruit.
They're all fruit, yeah. It's like fruit. Much else?
Honey.
Sorry?
Honey.
Honey? Well, bees created that. God created bees, of course. I'm not saying God didn't, but really honey is used by bees to keep its procreation process going with its progeny, right? So, sorry?
Maple syrup.
Maple syrup. Well, it comes from a tree, so you could say there's trees. In fact, in Australia, a lot of our eucalypts have honey as a part of the nectar that comes straight off the flower, and you flick it on your hand. You can just lick it, and it's like honey. Right? You don't even have to harvest the tree or anything. It's just, and in fact, in Australia, we've got lots and lots of birds called lorikeets, and some of you have ever visited there. They're colourful, like more colourful than sort of man's face. Colour, and they eat the honey, and that's all they do. Actually, a lot of birds just eat nectar. Yeah, it's nectar from the tree. So yes, trees, fruit. So you can say basically it's to do with vegetation here. This is primarily God's creation. Honey really comes from bees' activity, so you can say that's an extension of it, but it's really these things that are the sweets. So if we were in tune with our emotions and we were in tune with God's laws, if we wanted something sweet, we'd do that. We'd eat those things, right? But what do humans create as substitutes for that? It's candy, chocolate, and so forth, right? Now, they mimic certain functions in the brain that these things would also mimic, but they are also much more strongly aligned to emotional injury. So now a person with an emotional injury with regard to sweets is going to be more attracted to them than they are to them, right? But how the emotional experience will help us is as we eat more of this, what will eventually happen? If we eat more candy, chocolate and everything, to the point where we're eating it sort of every day, a lot every day, there's going to be a number of things that start happening to the physical body and also to the digestive system in the physical body that start causing you pain. So you could say, looking back on this diagram, the sin must be eating those things, because by engaging it regularly, it ends up with causing pain in my body. So this is an example of a physical law being broken. So as long as I can be sensitive to the pain that's in my body, I'll recognise the law. That's the point. But if I'm not sensitive to the pain in my body, I'll just keep ignoring its pain and just keep eating the thing that's bad for me more and more and more. Right? Now, can you see the law it's already educating me, but it really gets down to how sensitive I am emotionally and also sensorially, like in my bodies, to realise whether it's bad for me or not. So this is how a person gets overweight and eventually really fat and so forth, is because of desensitization to the process of what's causing me pain and suffering. Now, God created a system where he wants you to be sensitive physically, as well as, in your physical body, your spiritual body, which is also physical, as well as your soul. Now, the person who's sensitive in their soul, with their emotion, is going to recognise the law faster. So that's the benefit of having these emotional experiences. If you're sensitive to it, you recognise, I can feel the pain coming on even, and I go, there's got to be something wrong here with what I'm doing. Right? And then eventually what that does is it helps me realise from a physical level, what I'm choosing to consume is actually causing me pain, causing the sensory experience of pain to my body, and therefore causing me the emotional response to that is going to be pain. I'm going to go, well, that's not a good thing to do. And if I want to be healthy and I want to actually have nice things that are helping my body, then I better choose a different form of food in order to make that shift, right? So that's how even your emotional experience affects even the choices you make for your physical form. Yeah. But if you look at the other areas of life, so you look at the sexual area of life, you look at the spiritual area of life, it works in exactly the same way. So there are spiritual beliefs you can have that are actually going to cause you pain. So we talked about some of them in Portugal with the group about reincarnation and how it causes pain. The belief of reincarnation and why it causes pain. And then there's the belief, the Christian belief that Jesus died for your sins. That's going to cause you pain in the long term as well. The Muslim beliefs associated with feeling like you're going to, if you live a righteous life, you'll be rewarded with like many women in the spirit world. Like, that's going to cause you pain too. Every false belief causes pain, and it's about how sensitive you are emotionally as how early you recognise it. So the goal God has is to help you not desensitise emotionally. What he wants to do is he wants to help you sensitise emotionally. But if you think about our childhood, often it was the opposite of that, where it's desensitising us emotionally. And so we're going to have to reverse the desensitisation of our childhood in order to understand when something is harmful to me and to actually feel it in our feelings, in our emotions. So, if you can be sensitive emotionally, it's a very, very good thing for you to learn the law, how to learn the law. Make sense? You have any more questions about that?
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about insincere versus sincere emotions.
Sure. So let's... Many of you have seen me mention a few sort of basic you could call them principles that would govern our life. We started raising on this trip. We started raising the principles. I think it was in Belgium actually. But so let's look at principles that are, let's say, loving principles. So firstly, love, obviously, right? Then we've got truth, humility, faith, and let's put in action because we need to take some action about these things, right? Now, in 2016, we did a series of what we called assistance groups, and in the very first one of these groups, we talked about these things as qualities worth developing. Right? So there's my qualities worth developing. Now, obviously, in amongst that is truth. What does truth mean? So we look at truth. What do you think truth means?
Are you asking me?
Anybody who will answer. But yes, if
Facts.
Sorry, facts. Right, so facts.
Honesty.
Sorry?
Honesty.
Honesty. Yeah, honesty.
Transparency.
Transparent.
God's truth, not my truth.
Yeah, so transparent. Now, okay. When we say God's truth and not my truth, well, pretty much everything's God's truth and none of it's my truth. So the whole concept of my truth is really, there's no such thing really, is there? It's just God's truth and there's whether I accept it or not.
So there's really what you're referring to there, isn't it, Jacob, about being humble about the truth, like wanting God's truth.
Yeah.
Seeking truth in a humble way, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. So you could say when it comes to truth, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to God because God created it. God created the laws that govern what truth is and what the facts are. So, but we're looking here at the qualities of truth. Like, what does it feel like? Right? Facts is sort of almost without feeling, isn't it? Almost. But then if you look at some of these other things, you can start to see there's feelings involved, isn't there? Like honest. What does that mean? It means I've got to, so if we're talking about with self, I've got to be honest with myself. I've got to be honest about what drove me to an action. Honest about why I was driven to that action, right? Transparent means I've got to get to the stage where I'm comfortable with you knowing everything about me, right? And seeing everything about me. And in fact, so comfortable with it that I'm happy to be me. On an emotional level, I'm happy to be me and for you to see it. Right? So if I feel sad, I start crying. I'm happy to start crying. That's me. In the moment, that's me being me. Right? So you can see that some of these things start to involve, don't they, an emotional experience. They're not just facts anymore, but they're actually emotional experiences that I will be happy to display. So you could say they're the facts of how I feel, is another way of putting it. But I'm happy to display the facts of how I feel. Now, how I feel is me being truthful with about how I feel. But is that truth what God feels I feel? So to be truth, it would have to be what God feels I feel. So an example of that is I'm talking to you and I start to get a bit frustrated. Right? Now, so what I do is I don't want you to feel that I'm frustrated. So I make a joke or I, do something that sort of relaxes me so that you don't see that I'm frustrated. Right? Now, in that moment, I haven't been truthful. Not emotionally truthful. It's not God's truth. God's truth is I'm frustrated. And God's law is measuring, the frustration. And I can joke about it, but at the end of the day, God's law is not measuring the joke as a good thing. God's law is measuring the frustration. The joke is a fake, and anything fake, God's laws. Every time we fake something, God's laws act in a corrective sense to it, right? And every time we do something in harmony with the truth of how we feel, then God's laws react positively to it. So a lot of people feel, oh, if I cover over my anger, for example, then it means it's good. But actually, from God's perspective, it's bad. Because the law is saying you're not being transparent. You're not being honest with how you're really feeling. Anger is what you really feel, so what are you going to do about that? Now, anger is also not what you really feel. There's a layer, anger is used to manipulate what you really felt into a power state. So God's laws are saying you don't even really feel angry. You feel sad or afraid, and you're trying to control it with anger, right? You're trying to get power over the real feeling. So God's truth is, when it comes to emotion, that God's laws want us to actually measure the actual, and they actually do measure the actual emotion, not the emotion you fabricate to avoid it. So when it comes to sincerity, which is another aspect of truth, which is what you asked about, right? Sincerity is the feeling that how I really feel in this is what I am expressing emotionally. So an example of that with God is this. Let's say inside I've been taught all my life that God's sort of like a punishing God. God made hellfire torment me when I pass, and on top of that, if I do pass into hellfire, in the spirit world, then it means that I'm going to be there forever. And I've been taught this as a child. Now, any child who's taught this is going to finish up mistrusting God, right? For sure. Because you're thinking, well, God's like this nasty person who's going to hammer me into submission forever if I do something wrong. It doesn't feel fair, but it also, so I feel God's unfair, God's unjust, I can't trust God. That's my true feeling. So someone comes along, like Jesus comes along and he says, you need to be responsive to ask God for love. But my sincere feeling is, God's a mongrel. That's my feeling. Like, everything I've learnt from my childhood is that God is terrible. God's punishing, wrathful, vengeful, nasty, right? Nasty piece of work is generally what a lot of people in their heart believe, right? So why would I want to do that? So it'd be far more sincere to talk about those emotions with God and say, I think you're a nasty, vengeful, wrathful God, and why would I want a relationship with you? Than it would be to try to fake a feeling that you don't have. So that's the difference between facade and sincerity. Sincerity is you don't fake what's actually there. Your emotional state, whatever that is what you present to people, but also to God. It's the same in a partnership. So if I'm upset with Mary, I don't go, oh, Mary, everything's fine, and make out that I'm not upset. I'll have to say, I'm upset, and the reason why I'm upset is because of this particular problem. I need to say it, rather than fake. And sincerity, which is an aspect of truth, will cause me to do that. Will cause me to be honest in all my dealings with everyone. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. Who's next? Yep, if we come this side here. Keep your hand up, remember.
Sorry. I have a question. Can you fully repent even though the people that were affected by your sins are still in pain? And then, for instance, my young child, can I truly be happy even though I can see him still
in pain as a result of your sins? Yeah. Very good question. Let's have a look at it. So here I am, I'm in this form, right, and I've taken actions. I've had a child, and that child, which I'll draw here, obviously that child is half of a soul, right, as well. We're talking about a male? No, child.
Yeah, we met him.
Sorry?
We met him,
Yeah.
No?
Yeah. So, my child. So, there's my child, and my emotional feelings in a way have driven certain actions which have then involved my child. And then I'm going, well, I've done a lot of things to damage my child, and I start recognising. So in other words, I have an awakening, and during the process of this awakening, I become aware that I've harmed my child in different ways. And a lot of times the ways are more spiritual and emotional and sexual than they are physical even. So we've harmed our child in lots of different ways. We start realising it. And we're asking God for love, and we feel sorry for what we've done. We're asking God for love. And because I'm in a state of awakening, I'll receive some love from God. And then I'll feel happier as a result of receiving that love. I'll also go through some experiences of correction where I no longer do those things with my child anymore. I also go through a little bit of pain, emotional pain as well. When I say a little bit, it might be quite significant amounts, but I go through pain, releasing some of the reasons why I chose to take those actions towards my child. But in doing all of that, my child is still in the same state. Right? So how can I be happy? Is the question. Right? It's pretty hard, isn't it, when you notice that you've done things to harm somebody else, and you notice you've received some love and you've gone through a corrective process, but you still notice that that person is in pain as a result of what you chose to do. Right? Firstly, there are a number of awarenesses that will develop in this process. The first one is this: sin always creates pain, not just for me, but also for others. Now, once I understand that in my feelings, I will be a lot more circumspect, won't I, about how I sin, if I truly understand that. And one of the benefits of having children is, in fact, understanding that, coming to understand that more rapidly, and therefore choosing to no longer sin as a result of understanding that. So that's the first thing I'll understand. Secondly, I have, through the process, become happier myself. So, in other words, a process of repentance does lead to becoming happy. So I learn that. I become happier as I repent. Also, the process of repentance awakens me to awareness, more awareness, of things that are right and wrong. So the process of repentance also causes a growing moral condition where I'm now recognising what is right and what is wrong more and more and more. But my child, unfortunately, is still in the same state. Now, if I truly change, can you see with these things, I will now start having a more loving interaction with my child, if I'm having an interaction at all. I will have a more loving interaction with my child. Now the child has the ability to go through the same process I had to go through, because I'm educating my child how to do that, a more loving interaction with my child. But if I'm not careful and I don't deal with another emotion, and that is every time I break a moral law, so if I write this in red now, so this is every time I break a moral law, I will have guilt. In other words, I did something wrong and the conscience is starting to work because of my emotional sensitivity that we talked about just earlier. My conscience starting to work. as a result of my conscience starting to work, I'm now recognizing the feeling of being condemned, which is guilt. It's a feeling that says, you did something wrong. You are guilty of wrong, right? But that's different to a feeling of shame. Now, what most people do is they confuse guilt with shame. Guilt says you did something wrong, fix it. Shame says you did something wrong, just feel bad about it for the rest of your life. Do you recognise the difference? Guilt is saying fix it. Shame is saying don't fix it, just stay in it. Right? Now, if I act in my shame towards my child, I will actually commit more sin. And what I mean by that is, by acting in my shame, I will start doing things like, come on, kid, you need to get out of the problem I caused. You need to stop reminding me that I caused you damage. So you start acting in such a way towards your children that you try to force them out of the condition you created in them. It's a very unfair thing to do. But it's acting upon shame, not guilt. The person who is guilty, who's been condemned and said, what I did was either right or wrong, and if it's wrong, correct it, fix it, would start to repair, firstly, himself. So he'd go, why did I do those things towards my children? I'd sort that out. And then on top of that, wherever I could, I would take the action with my child where I'm actually acting to repair my own damage and correct myself, not my child. Whenever I act in shame, I will act to correct my child and not myself. Now, a person who's truly repentant acts to correct themselves and repair any damage they've done to other people in the process. But they do not choose to force another person to accept the process. They do not force another person to make changes themselves. So in other words, I cannot force my child to make changes. That would be me trying to avoid my shame rather than to recognise that I'm guilty of a sin and I just need to either correct it or repair it. Or both is really what I need to do. But what most people do is they act in their shame and they start trying to force the child to change based on their new awareness. And that's not an act of love at all. That's an act of avoiding shame. So the question was, how can I be happy? Well, firstly, if you act in harmony with guilt, which says you did the wrong thing, and you try to correct or repair the damage to your best ability, then you can be happy because you're doing your best now to fix the problem. But if you act in shame and you start pressurizing the child to make changes, you shouldn't be happy. In fact, you're committing more sin, and to which you have to be more condemnation, more guilt, and so you won't be happy. You'll be constantly worried about your child, constantly worried about what they're doing, constantly trying to measure what they're doing, and then constantly criticising them about what they're doing. And all of these things will actually cause damage to the child. Right? So a person who is truly repentant can be happy because they're choosing to properly correct and repair the damage of their past behaviour. But a person who's not truly repentant will choose to act in their shame, trying to avoid other feelings of shame inside of themselves by trying to force the person they've harmed into a different course of action, which of course is going to cause more sin, though acting in a sinful manner, it will cause more damage. So you as a parent have a responsibility to be happy. Can you see that? Because if you can become happy, you're not going to visit all of your unhappiness upon your child. And if shame is what you're acting in, that's your unhappiness. So you have to go through your own unhappiness about that to the point where it's no longer there, so that you can be happy now and content that you're doing everything you possibly can to correct your own behaviour and to repair the damage of your own behaviour without forcing the changes you're making upon another person. Under those circumstances, you can be happy. So emotionally, you can sin, go through repentance, and then actually be happy, even though the people around you are not yet happy. And in fact, you need to be happy in order for them to see the changes you've made. Make sense? Yeah.
Second. Fear. I have a lot of fear about this, but that is more of a shame.
Correct. Yeah, you fear that you have about, oh, look at the damage I've done to my child. You know, and you see your child, as they grow up, you can start to see them acting in the damage that you created. So I've got 2 sons, and my oldest son is 40, and my youngest one's 38. And I see them acting, even now, to this day, in the manners in which I taught them in my own sin to act. You know, I've corrected my own sin in almost all the areas that I dealt with, that I had earlier, but my sons are still acting in it. And so when I see them there doing that, the question I have to ask myself is, if I'm unhappy about that, then it means that I have more guilt to feel. It means that I've not done everything I can to repair that damage. Firstly, remember, it has to be everything I can, not with them, but with me, you know, first, and then do what I can to repair the damage, which I've tried to do and continue to do. And in fact, once you recognise your sin, generally you'll continue the attempt to repair until such a time as the thing is repaired. The other thing I do too is I pray to God about some things, because I know I can't repair them now. And I know that it's only God and God's laws and God's love that it's going to repair them. Does that make sense? So I ask for, you know, my son's not my son, right? He's God's child. And all I did was, you know, brought his 2 bodies into the world. I didn't bring him there, just his 2 bodies. And so he's not my son, he's God's son. And so at some point I've got to recognise that I damaged God's son. God's sons, 2, in my case 2 sons. So I damaged 2 of God's children. And at some point, if I'm humble and I'm working my way through that, I will get to the stage where I no longer feel guilt anymore, which means my process is complete, right? And on top of that, I will be happy, because it's a responsibility for me to be happy, so I can mirror to them what they can do if they want to be happy. Yeah, makes sense? Yeah. So very important to understand that when you act in fear as a parent, you are acting in your own shame and fear. It is going to damage the child further, because any fear is the opposite of truth. So you're going to harm the child further. Good.
To that, I feel responsibility for a lot of people's pain. So, like in this case, probably a sin, but some people I don't know, and I want to feel the pain of it. It's also like an addiction, but it's also
it's an addiction. Yeah.
It's from my mom, and I think she uses a lot of shame till this day.
Yeah.
And like it's that a coping mechanism, or I don't know how to call that.
Yeah, well, this is what happens with a lot of us when we're growing up, isn't it? We have a parent who feels that they want to constantly pull down their child in some way or another. Oftentimes the parent does it because they feel that if the child takes a certain action that the parent doesn't feel good about, then the parent often thinks that they're responsible for the child's action. And so what they try to do then is they try to modify the child's behaviour by, usually you know, some parents will do it psychologically, so that's all about shame, guilt, all those kind of guilting the child, shaming the child, things like that. Other parents do it more verbally, like where they start to get verbally abusive towards their children. And other parents will get even more violently abusive and start belting the child and everything to correct their behaviour. So the problem often is that as a child, so if you're the child of this parent, so child of the parent, and you're feeling this barrage of emotions that are coming right from the young age, and they're entering your soul, right? Your half of the soul. And that then causes you to believe that to make the parent feel good about themselves, you've got to take a number of actions, right? And unfortunately, the parent now has trained you to have an addiction, to be responsible for others. Does that make sense? So now I've got this addiction to be responsible for others. So, and in particular, anybody who reflects a similar attitude or feeling as my parents' pain, I will be in particular attached to having the addiction of being responsible for them.
Try to fix it, or like to be the how do you call it, the cause of the pain.
Well, yeah, the parent's really fundamentally saying to this child that it is the cause of the parent's pain. And then the child has to change its behaviour in order to change the parent's feelings, is really what the parent's saying. So the parent is basically training the child to actually have an addiction, which is, by the way, a sin, right? And the addiction is to feel responsible for people other than itself. You see, fundamentally, the only person you really can change is yourself. And in fact, it's a lack of humility to believe you can change anyone else. That makes sense to everyone? It's a lack of humility to believe you can change anyone other than yourself. Right? So if I'm truly humble, I would go, look, the only person I can change is me. I can't change you. I can influence you into change, potentially, but I can't actually make you make the change. So I can make suggestions. I can talk to you about some truth that might help, but I can't physically do it myself. I'm not capable of doing it myself. A lot of parents want to believe that their pain is caused by their child. And this causes the child to believe, to set up an addiction, to believe that it's responsible for its parent's pain. In the process of feeling responsible, it develops an addiction in its childhood that then as an adult, it feels like, I've got to keep doing this, I've got to keep doing this, I've got to keep doing this, because if I keep doing this, eventually these people will be happy with me.
Like a love?
I'll get love from them if I keep doing it, yes. But it's not love, is it? No, because if it was love, they'd love you no matter what you did, right? So it's not love. It's just the parents wanting the child's behaviour to change for the parent's sake. Right? Now, that's an addiction, and it's going to have its own pain. And the pain is, every time you meet a new person, they've got a certain type of sadness or a certain type of fear or a certain type of rage that matches one or both of your parents. You'll feel inclined to do things for them and save them from themselves, and
even feel feelings for them.
Try to feel feelings for them. Yeah.
Cry and
yeah, all sorts. You'll feel inclined to do all of that, not being aware that actually it's an addiction and therefore a sin, right? And it's going to cause you trouble, this sin, because you're going to disconnect from yourself and your own changes in preference to connecting to other people and their problems, which you can't change, right? Because the only person that can change the other person is themselves.
It's in my brain, it does it. It's easier to help someone else than me, because
Well, this is also what happens over time, is it's easier to, for most people, what happens is this. instead of me here developing a love of self, right? So instead of doing that, I work to get love from someone else, right? Because that person taught me that's how you're not going to get love until you do what I want.
And in fact, if you don't take on responsibility for my feelings, then there's going to be the opposite of love. There's going to be punishment. And so it creates a double problem where you get sort of positive reinforcement, if you like, for taking on the pain of others and feeling like, I've got to help solve that problem emotionally. And then the kind of negative reinforcement, if you like, of like, if I just do my own thing and feel my own feelings, everybody's very angry because I'm not sharing in their experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not allowed to feel that because everyone needs me.
Yeah, well, you get to a stage even where you completely forget yourself in almost every circumstance if you're not careful. And that's going to have its own pain as well associated with it. So that tells you that it is an addiction, and also that you're avoiding love of self, which is actually a big thing that most people avoid. They would rather have someone else love them than to let everybody else off the hook for loving them. And instead they love themselves. Do you follow what I mean by that, Isabel? Yeah. It's sort of like, if I let Mary off the hook for loving me, then she doesn't have to love me anymore, does she?
It's the fear of being alone.
It's the fear of being unloved by everybody.
Yeah.
But also, I don't want to develop a love of self, because that would let everybody else off the hook for loving me.
Yeah.
If I love myself, then I don't need Mary to love me, and I don't need you to love me, and I don't need anybody to love me if I love myself. But a lot of people, when they contemplate that, they go, but then what's going to happen? Nobody's going to love me. But actually, love is a gift, and sooner or later somebody's going to come along who actually does love you. And they'll love you not because of anything you've done for them or anything else, but because they want to give you that gift. You follow?
And also God created us to be okay alone. And a lot of us don't believe that anymore.
Yeah. It is inevitable that you will meet your soulmate in your future. It's inevitable. But God, between now and then, if you live in harmony with God's principles and laws, and in particular in harmony with his standard of love, you won't be unhappy. Right? You can become happy even though you've not met your other half yet. Right? So the only reason why we don't become happy is because we generally start relying on other people to love us rather than developing a sense of love of self. Now for me, this was really tricky. Like I remember in my 30s, I went through a big experience with my family where my whole family rejected me, and because I left their religious faith, and they just all rejected me. And I came to realise that actually I didn't care about myself as much as I thought, because I was so distressed by the fact my family didn't love me anymore, or didn't care about me anymore. Now, once I worked my way through that, I came out the other end of that feeling very happy. And to this day, my family don't care about me, by the way. So they haven't really changed. But to this day, I'm happy now, right? So my love of self has grown. Not perfect yet, but it's getting there. But I've got enough love of self now to not really worry about what they feel about me at all. I don't even think about it anymore, about what their feelings or thoughts are about me. I'm aware of what they are, but it doesn't bother me anymore.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah, it is lovely, because it means that I'm not waiting. It might take, who knows, it could take them 1,000 years to love them. In the first century life, my father didn't love me very much in my first century life. The whole of my first century life, my father, Joseph, didn't love me much at all. And he was very hard on me, critical. He wanted me to be a warrior, like a fighting Messiah is what he wanted me to be. And he was quite angry with me a lot. He was also on the Sanhedrin, which was the 70 men who basically led the nation by the time of my death. And that was the Sanhedrin that condemned me to death. And even though my father wasn't involved in the vote, he wanted to be on the Sanhedrin that condemned me to death. So his feelings towards me weren't that good. After I passed, and he had some realizations about myself as a person and my care of others and so forth, within the next 12 to 15 years, he changed completely. So by the time he arrived in the spirit world, because he arrived in the spirit world well after I arrived, and he arrived in the spirit world about 18 years after I arrived in the spirit world. And by the time he arrived, I could give him a hug and he could actually hug me and feel love for me. So, but all of my life up until then, he didn't care about me at all. So he was more forceful with me, and in my childhood he actually put me through some things that resulted in my torture as a young child. So there was lots of feelings that he had about me that changed over time. But if I had taken some responsibility for his feelings and tried to take responsibility for his life, what I would have done is every time my dad wanted me to do something or be something, that's what I would have done. And it would have destroyed my relationship with God completely in that process. So my real father, I would have had no relationship with at all, because my other father, the one who created my bodies, he wanted me to do something completely different. So this is the danger of not having some sense of self and love of self and getting into this addiction with your family to please them all the time. And that applies to husband and wife, partner as well. The danger of pleasing them all the time without it being a desire just to give them a gift rather than just feeling the need or the guilt of pleasing them, is you enter this addiction that in the end it tunes you so far away from yourself, but also away from your relationship with God as well. So that's why it's such a big thing to address. Yeah. Makes sense, Isabella? Yeah. We just go across to Emma as well.
And if you're by yourself and you can't satisfy that addiction with physical people, you do it with spirits.
Well, you often do it with your children next.
Yeah.
So if you have children, you set up the addictions with your children, which is obviously also a sin. And then on top of that, yes, for the most part, even if you're by yourself, you'll set up the same addiction with spirits. So you'll actually attract oppressive spirits who tell you what to do with the illusion that you're getting loved by them. And you'll attract them. And in the process of attracting them, they will get in your head a bit and tell you what to do with your life and so forth to please themselves. And you'll be very tempted to do those things. In fact, some people we've met even believe those spirits to be God, telling them what to do. Yeah.
Yes.
So.
And you told me that I had spirits with me from early in my childhood.
Yeah.
So is it a similar dynamic with them?
Well, you think about your relationship with your father. You know your relationship with your father is one where your father was quite oppressive, telling you what to do, very disappointed with you when you didn't do what he wanted. Does that make sense? He was setting up things thinking he's helping you, but really he never asked you whether he's helping you. But he's thinking self-righteously, I'm helping my daughter, helping her out. So this is what he's doing. So if your father passes, can you see it's highly likely you're going to set up the same relationship with male spirits?
Yeah.
Because you will actually interpret that as loving. And also you want the safety and security of somebody telling you what to do. It's an illusion of safety, of course, but you want it. And that's what, when we met you, right, for the first time physically, face to face, you were in that relationship with spirits. You were, and first conversation, remember, you
Yeah,
invited us
I do.
over for dinner, and the very first conversation was, what about these spirits that are with you? Like, what are you doing here with them, and what's
Yeah.
going on, and you know, how are you getting manipulated by these people? And as a result of you becoming more aware, which is not yet awakening, but it's the first part of awakening, aware, by becoming more aware that it was not a good thing, you started becoming also more aware of how they were influencing you.
Yeah,
And this is how you become aware of, oh, they're trying to set up my relationships.
yeah,
My very last relationship, they set up altogether.
yeah.
You know, you become aware of these things through a process of discovery. Yeah.
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 And the difference between awareness and awakening, I can feel now, but I can't tell what I'm doing wrong exactly.
That's
There's
right.
something-
That's right.
something
That's the
wrong,
difference.
But I can't tell
Yeah,
what
yeah.
it is, so if I can't tell what it is, then I don't have the incentive to stop it. Like, or I
That's
don't know how
right.
to stop it.
So you can say aware is just going, something's wrong, something's wrong. You know, like that's aware, right? I'm now worried that something's wrong, but I don't know what's wrong,
Yeah,
and I don't know why it's wrong, and I don't know how it's wrong,
yeah,
and I don't know what's really going on yet. And so you're going to discover all of those things down to awakening. Now notice I put 10 there.
yeah.
Right, the reason why is there's a lot of steps in it, there's more than 10,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of steps in between to get to this stage where I'm actually awake, where I go, I know what the sin is, I know what I'm doing, I know why I'm doing it, I know what emotion I need to address, I'm working through that emotion, you know, I want to work through that emotion, I see the sin in it, and all of those kind of things. So you often start off at this sort of state where you sort of, something is made, initially it might even just be intellectually, but usually it requires a bit of feeling of something's wrong, and it bothers you, you know, this is where you have sleepless nights, right? Where you go, oh, something's wrong and I don't know what about it, and then you worry about it, and you know, praying about it maybe, you know, asking other people about it as well, like what's going on here, can you see anything, whatever. You're questioning the whole relationships of what's going on around you and so forth, because you're realising you're being bothered. Now, there's a combination of things going with being bothered. And one of them is the conscience, which is God basically saying, something's wrong. If God can't tell you what's wrong, he can at least go, something's wrong. Does that make sense? It's sort of like you think of, you own a car, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're driving along on the road with a car, and it's sort of like wandering over the road a bit. So it doesn't go where you're pointing.
Yeah.
Sort of like, like driving itself, it almost seems to be. Well, I'm not talking about these new self-drive ones now. I'm just saying there's something wrong with the car. So you know something's wrong.
Yeah.
So that's this point. Right, now, it's easy for somebody to tell you something's wrong. It's easy even for you to recognise something's wrong.
Yes.
It's much, much more difficult to recognise what is wrong.
Yes.
Right? That requires a number of things on your part. If you think about it with a vehicle driving along, it requires maybe a little experimentation.
Yeah.
It requires somebody giving you some extra knowledge. It requires you understanding what might make a car, you know, wander over the road. Because there could be all sorts of things, couldn't there? There could be just loose wheel nuts on your wheel, and in the next 5 kilometres it might come off. Or it could be, you know, wheel alignment, or what are called tie rods that control the angle of the vehicles on the road. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have no idea what those things are, so I'd have to find out what are those
Exactly,
things.
exactly. And so most of us go, let's go to an expert. So we go and we take the vehicle to, you know, a mechanic, and he tells us what's wrong. Right? So you can also do that. You can go to somebody who you believe is an expert. But the trouble with that is that it's not very self-reliant.
Yes.
And not very self-responsible. It's also, you also now you're making a dependency on the person.
Yeah.
So now you're dependent on them telling you things, which when it comes to your soul is a dangerous thing.
I need the education, so I understand.
Yeah,
So I don't do
so
it.
that's a part of this process. So once you become aware something's wrong, you sort of got this thing going, wrong, but I don't know what. Now that's going to motivate the desire in you, potentially, to discover what, which is a very good thing to do for yourself. This is something every person needs to do for themselves.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So this process of awareness is just an initial, something's wrong, right the way through to a complete awakening, which is I know exactly what is wrong, I know exactly what to do to fix it, I know exactly why it's wrong, I know exactly why it's a sin. I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
That requires a number of steps in between. And in about 2006 or 7 or something, I wrote a document, which is on our website, describing the process of awakening, which often begins on an intellectual basis, where you step through 7 or 8 steps intellectually, and then there's still no awakening, because for an awakening to happen, it has to be emotional. It has to be because emotions motivate change, so it has to be emotional. So you also have to go through a number of steps emotionally in order to awaken, and I did describe those steps back then. And so I'd recommend it's good to sort of understand the process of awakening, because then you can go, I'm at aware, but I'm not any further than that.
Yeah.
And what do I need to do to get from aware to awake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for something like this that's been with me all my life, I guess it will take a little while to go through those steps.
Certainly. Often the things that have been with us for a while, and particularly since we're very young, it takes even a lot of time even just to get to aware. And usually after we get to aware, it's a lot easier because our desire develops to awake after we become aware. But for many of us, it's like, and this is the case for most of you, you're not even aware of your sin yet, let alone awake to it. You follow? Because to be aware, become aware, you've got to know something's wrong in a situation. And frequently I see most of you acting in disharmony with love in a situation without seeing anything wrong.
Is this where the sensitivity comes in?
Where the
sensitivity,
emotional sensitivity.
yes, to help with the awareness.
It helps. The conscience helps. We talked about the
Yeah.
conscience a lot in Portugal, and also I think we started that discussion in Austria, didn't we? Mm-hmm. So conscience helps a lot. There's also obviously receiving love from God also helps, but of course you can't receive love from God until you awaken to some sin. So it's sort of like you've got to go through the process first.
Yeah.
So that helps a lot. But also having honest, truthful friends can help you a lot. You know, people who care about you and love you, who you can sort of ask questions. It's like going to a mechanic, but you've just got to be careful of coming to rely on them. And so for myself, I've not had that in my life, like anybody I could sort of rely upon to tell me truths. And so I've had to come to a strong reliance on the conscience in order to hear God's truth being shared. And so when it comes to the operation of the conscience, I'm very focused on it myself, because that's like God's your friend, sharing facts through, truth through the operation of the conscience. And that can help you with your awareness to awakening process a lot,
Can we also add, Jay, compassion with self is quite important in that process.
Yep.
And curiosity, if you like.
Yeah.
Being curious. Okay, I feel myself there.
Experimenting,
sort of seeking, having a seeking kind of a heart about the whole process. Because it's a good process, but often we get uncomfortable because we start to judge what we're noticing. But actually, if you can stay soft in that process, it's so rewarding, because each new part of the awareness or the things that open up, now I understand myself so much better. This is why my life has gone like this. It's quite a good process.
Yeah. When it comes to judgment, it feels like I'm getting judged a lot by the spirits.
Well, you are. Spirits around you generally, if they're in a codependent addiction with you, they don't want you to change. And so they're going to do things like try to undermine your change.
It's not a true judgment because they're quite happy with you in that process. It's
Yeah.
just more trying to shame you, if you like, back into your old behaviour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been realising like I've been agreeing with that. And
Yeah.
now I'm trying to not agree with that.
But that's a part of the
Yeah.
process of becoming awake. You
Yeah.
go, oh, I was doing this and I'm not, I can't do that anymore either,
Yeah.
and oh, I'm doing that. And God wants you to go through the process yourself, because if you do it for yourself, you'll become very, very awake inside of yourself.
Yeah.
That's why He doesn't want, God wants the process to be voluntary on your part, because He knows that if it's voluntary and you do it for yourself, you'll not only end up with getting rid of the problem, but you'll end up with a great degree of confidence that you can solve any problem,
Yeah.
which is obviously very important as well.
Yeah, I did feel like that. I didn't want to become dependent upon you, but like you are the source of truth. So I need the truth, but not to be like asking you everything.
Yeah, you say that, but actually when I did share with you about this stuff, you completely denied it at the beginning. So,
Oh, that first dinner, I said I was just completely under the influence. I couldn't like.
I know.
Yeah.
I know what's happening. But can you see how what I'm saying is you can even think
Yeah.
that, Jesus has actually said some truth with me. But the reality is most of us don't even believe that in our heart
I'm
in the
not fully
moment.
so I'm not fully accepting it.
No, because at the end of the day, you have to go through an experience to know whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
And once you started going through the experience, you go, oh, this is what he was saying. now I get what he was saying. But that's a part of the awareness. One of the beautiful things about awakening to your own sin is that you become awake to others as well, as a part of the process. And that's really handy when it comes to dealing with your own sin, because then you start to be able to determine what is my sin and what is the other's sin.
Yeah.
So in other words, just earlier when we were talking to Isabella about her need to, do things for others, feel guilty about, others, you can start going, do I have to feel guilty about others? Well, that once you deal with that sin of feeling guilty, you'll recognise the sin of the other person demanding that you feel guilty. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's only by you going through your part that you start to recognise, oh, there's the other half of that.
Yeah. I have found that really confusing. Like, what's my fault and what's their fault? Like, whose sin is this?
Yeah, and that's not going to be happening here. That only happens here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
get that.
So you've got to be, sort of, as Mary pointed out, loving to self, patient with self. Go through the process, develop a desire to go through the process. But you've got to let yourself go through the process.
Stay engaged
Stay
in the
engaged,
process.
yeah.
A lot of people start to be aware, start the process and go, oh, I'm backing out. It's harder to back out once you've had initial awareness, but it's possible. Once you awaken, now you can never unsee or unfeel the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does feel like up and down with it at the moment.
Yeah, well, in amongst here, you'll find there's certain, you say there's certain sins of your own as to the reason why you do a thing.
Yeah.
And so an example is you might be pandering to spirits, like in terms of doing what they suggest, but you have your own reasons for doing that, And during the process of becoming aware, you go, oh, here's a reason why I'm doing that. Like I like them interfering with my life because it makes me feel maybe more secure, more financially secure, makes me feel like I'm not going to get in trouble. There's all sorts of things that could be reason that you start working out in the process of becoming awake. But once you are fully awake, you will not do it again. You will not want to do it again. You'll want to be. You'll feel sorry about all of the actions taken, and you'll correct them.
So in the process of awakening to a certain sin, you're sort of finding other sins along the way. And then are there sort of like just usually a few main sins, and then sort of all the others are sort of tributaries from it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the beauty of awareness, is that the aware to awakening process is you become so aware that you can feel the little tiny, even the little tiny things in everything you do as to why, what motivation, why you do it, why you want to do it, how it feels. You become aware of all of that and where you've been doing it, every time you do it, everything.
And when you say you become aware of it and you feel it, I get like sometimes like a shooting pain here or like a feeling here. Is that sort of is that how the conscience communicates, like through feeling different feelings in your
When you say
soul?
the conscience, God communicates to you via the conscience. So God can tell you at any time what is wrong. The real issue we have is listening. You know, the lack of emotional sensitivity most of us have, and most of us have had that because of childhood experiences. The lack of emotional sensitivity that occurs causes you to no longer be able to listen clearly. So God's always trying to share truth via the conscience. Whether you hear it is really a function of how sensitive you are. And so one of the goals God has with us is to make us more sensitive, to help us become more sensitive people.
And that sensitivity is like the whole of your physical body, spirit body, like
Well, your soul,
soul.
really.
Soul.
Because
It's called communicates to the soul.
via the conscience, yeah.
Okay.
And you're in panic now,
Yeah.
you reckon? Yeah.
Yep.
So a lot of your questions now are being driven by the panic. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to know it all right now.
Yeah. And this is another thing that, understand, fear is a feeling you're going to have to go through. At the moment, you're trying to avoid it. Now, when you try to avoid fear, you start asking lots of question after question after question after question, but you're actually not feeling your fear, and your fear is what's stopping you from understanding.
Okay.
So you're going to have to go through the fear, but you want a way to deal with these problems without going through fear.
Yeah. I want to just understand it all really, really well. I think
Well, that's what the
But
purpose
it's
of
not.
the purpose of that is to avoid fear. So yeah, and that's going to be, it's going to not work. Is what I'm saying. You're going to have to feel fear first. Right? This is about emotional truth. You're going to have to go through the feeling of fear. Then all of this mind thing you're doing will sort of all dissipate, and you'll trust the emotional process rather than going through everything in your mind all the time. Do you follow?
Yeah.
Yeah. But your dad taught you to use your mind all the time.
Yep.
So actually, a part of your process of awareness is going to be realizing that actually I like using my mind all the time so that I can avoid the feeling of fear. Makes sense? And in the process of avoiding my fear, I get to not, fear stops me from understanding. So that causes me to more question, panic question, like all the time. And in this panic question phase of life, you're not going to be understanding anything. Because the fear is an emotion preventing understanding. Yeah. So this is an awareness you have not had about your fear. If you could just choose to feel fear, then there'd be internal soul freedom to absorb information. The fear prevents the absorption of information. So I can say a whole heap of things and you won't even hear them. Just like our first conversation, right? I said a whole heap of things and it was fortunate you had a recorder on because you didn't hear most of them until afterwards, right? When the fear started to die down a bit, then you could hear. Now, a very important thing is to allow yourself to feel the fear. So what's the fear about? It's going to be fear of disappointing dad, fear of disapproval from a male, fear of disapproval from God, thinking God is a male. There's a lot of things in there, right, that's stopping you from grasping, and it's about going through those things. Feeling the fear, not avoiding it through question. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and what's the time?
It's got about one.
Okay, 15 minutes and then we'll have to have a break. Can we go up the back? Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I think I'm in a opposition to what I think God is, or what it is. And when you say feeling feelings as the bottom line, basically, I don't want to do that.
That's right.
Because God would win. What I think God is would win. So
Yeah.
that's the gridlock, basically.
Yeah.
And I just don't know what to do.
Yeah. Can I start by saying, because there's more to your question, but let's start with what you've already asked. This is an example of a spiritual belief, or you could say a spiritual sin, causing emotional beliefs, which are also sins. Right? So an example of this is you believe God fundamentally is flawed, right? That God doesn't care about you, God doesn't love you. So these are spiritual beliefs, which are actually sins. So there's pain associated with these beliefs. Pain associated with these beliefs are, I can't trust God. I can't listen to God. I can't ask God for anything. I've got to do everything myself. These are all, you could say, the pain associated with such beliefs. Right? Now, these beliefs were caused, obviously, in your childhood, right? But also, you have chosen certain beliefs because of certain emotional reasons. So there's a linkage here between the spiritual beliefs being chosen and the emotional reason as to why the belief has been chosen. Right? So the emotion is, I can't handle emotion. That's the feeling inside of you, a terror about emotion.
Yeah, overwhelmed, basically. Being taken over.
Yeah, a terror about being overwhelmed by your emotional experience, shall we say. Okay? So the question then becomes, where did that terror come from and how did it get established? Doesn't it? So if that's the terror about feeling any emotion of any kind, then where, and by the way, most men on the planet have this terror. Women generally have less terror about it because for most men, whenever they felt emotion, there was more violence. For most women, whenever they feel emotion, there's less violence, generally speaking. And this is why men are generally more terrified of their emotions than women are. Right? Men have then a desire to live in their mind. And that's why they start to embrace everything intellectually. And they start detuning from their emotion quite significantly. Because they want to live in their mind, because in their mind, they can control the past experience of violence about their emotions. Right? So fundamentally, you could say there's a reason why the emotion exists as to I can't handle things. I can't handle emotion. Right? Which is really, you could say, we called it in 2016 a global terror, which exists in almost all of humanity, of emotion. Right? Now, in 2016, we did a series of groups, 5-day groups. I think there were 5 days. Yeah, and I think it was the second group, which was called
Developing My Loving Self.
Developing My Loving Self, wasn't it? The first one was Understanding My Loving Self, and then was Developing My Loving Self. I can't quite remember the. It's in 2016. If you look on the downloads page, events, and you select events, and then underneath you select 2016, you'll see them listed there. This global terror of emotion is like I don't believe much in conspiracy theories, right? But this is a conspiracy. The conspiracy is humans can't handle emotion in a loving manner. Emotion is what causes all of human problems, is the general conspiracy. And most of us have bought it off. And most of us have a severe amount of terror about even just being overwhelmed with a little bit, just a little bit of emotion even. We're terrified of feeling things. And because of that, we don't believe we are capable. The soul was created to be an emotional experience, like we said earlier. Remember when Hannah asked that question, it was like everything God designed, joy, happiness and everything, is going to be an emotional experience. And everything humans create, sin, suffering, pain, they are also going to be emotional experiences. But the majority of us are so worried about having any emotional overwhelm at all that that's our primary sin. So the primary sin becomes this terror of emotion that exists within. And that terror of emotion drives most of our action. It will drive a series of belief systems, spiritual beliefs. It'll drive as well. So spiritual beliefs like God's cruel, God's harmful, God wants me to feel and so God's punishing. I don't want to feel. God wants me to feel, that's bad. So you start setting up beliefs even with God associated with your terror of emotional experience. And the problem with that is that we've got two sets of opposition internally to actually our growth in love. One set of opposition is emotional, and the other sets of opposition are spiritual. And spiritual will always generally have a hierarchy of being higher in hierarchy over emotion even. So we start imbibing spiritual beliefs about God. So an example of a spiritual belief is, I feel God is punishing. That's a spiritual belief. I feel God is cruel. I feel God doesn't care about me. They're all spiritual beliefs about God. And these beliefs finish up guiding many of my actions in terms of stopping me. That does justifications to not have to feel some fundamental emotions. And by the way, one of the hardest emotions you're ever going to have to feel, and this applies to all of you, is this. Terror is an emotion that I find most people are almost, they believe themselves to be, the spiritual belief is that they are unable to feel terror. That it's the thing you must avoid at all costs. Terror is the thing that must be avoided. And so anything that says I need to feel terror, automatically we're starting to go, that's wrong, that's bad, that's not right, that's, we start treating it as if it's a false belief, right? And in the process of doing that, we're justifying it. And in fact, what most people don't realise is that terror, for most people, terror is just like a bit of a mound inside of their soul. But we turn it into a mountain by having these additional beliefs associated with it, right? So instead of it becoming just an experience I'm going to need to go through for a few weeks or a few months, and maybe even a year or two, like you might have to feel terror every day for a year or two, let's say. Because you think about childhood where it's violent, it was violent for 7 or 8, 10 years, 12 years, maybe 15 for some people. Then there's going to be a fair bit of terror associated with that violence, right, that they're going to have to experience now as an adult. That's sort of locked at that age, and you've got to become comfortable with feeling it, right? Once you feel that you can handle terror, you'll feel you can handle anything, right? And that's the beauty of being able to go through the emotion, is once you realise you can go through terror, you also realise you can go through any other emotion too. So my experience of terror has been, I had terror for nearly 6 years. I had it for 6 years. And during that phase, I came to become very, very comfortable with feeling any other emotion as well. Right? So that's the beauty of doing it. But it takes, this terror is actually infecting your spiritual beliefs. And that's why you said what you said about God and your feelings about God, is because this terror of your own feelings is actually creating in itself intellectual beliefs which support the suppression of the terror. And if you're not careful, you can create hundreds of beliefs internally, spiritual ones about God and about how the universe is created and about the human soul, that it's not emotional. You know, so we meet people, and these are, like an example of that is Buddhists. Most Buddhists they've created a whole belief structure which is supporting 2 or 3 primary concepts. The first one is that emotions are bad. You don't need to feel them, you just need to detune from them. The second one is that beliefs are bad. So it's better to have no beliefs. That's how you remain calm. Right? So they've actually created a belief system that believes in no beliefs. Does that make sense? Just because of the terror of emotion, they create a belief system that says, if I have to absorb a belief, then it's going to result in potentially internal confusion. Like I won't know what's, like I'll latch onto something being right and it might be wrong, right? So it's better to not think of right and wrong at all. So they come up with a belief structure that says there's no right and wrong. There's only love. But there's no right and wrong, is the general statement. But actually, there is right and wrong. What's loving is right and what's unloving is wrong. But even the belief system has been now created to support the detunement, the terror that they have about emotion. And the terror they have, and it creates a terror about belief, to the point where you'll construct an entire belief system that is all about not feeling and not having beliefs. Right? And that's how far we will go as humans when we try to detune from these feelings. So the question then becomes, what? How do I feel my terror? You know, that's
exactly what it's starting.
How do I get started with my terror? Well, when terror is within you, there are many attraction events. The law of attraction is working to trigger your terror. God knows that your terror is not good. So God's trying to create events. The law is trying to create events so that you can gently go through your terror. God's not trying to scare you to death. He's just bringing events which cause you to have some terror within. And these events are there to help you experience terror. The key is what you do with them. The majority of persons use all sorts of techniques to avoid them. So, food, sex, action of some kind, distraction, technology. There's all these addictions that often people create just to avoid the feeling of terror. So, I've got to, number one, start unraveling my own addictions to how do I avoid the experience of terror. Every one of you will have different methods, and you've got to start unraveling it for yourself. For me, I worked like I was a workaholic. That was one way I avoided my terror. I was a planaholic, and what I mean by that is I was addicted to just planning out every single day, the next day, writing out what I was going to do the next day, what might go wrong the next day, how I would fix what might go wrong the next day. And you can imagine I'm not very calm doing any of this. So that's what I was doing, was planning out my life. In addition, I was doing things like choosing to use certain types of food in the substances. Like for me, a bit of wine every night was great, I found. So I had a collection of wine. I'd have a bit every night, you know. I would also have a lot of sugar in my diet, so ice cream was a big thing for me. Like when I ate ice cream, I'd get a 4-litre tub, which is 1 gallon tub, and I'd divide it into 4, and that's my next 4 nights ice cream. So I found it very suppressive of my fear. So that's why I went for that. So yeah, of course, all of these things had negative consequences. And once I started realising those consequences, I stopped many of these addictions. The other thing is that you need to be able to sit with yourself for an extended period of time just feeling your fear. So what I taught myself to do was to lay on my bed, and I tried to do this for at least 2 hours a day, where I'd lay on my bed and I'd just feel the fear in my body. So I'd feel all of these sort of pains and fear, and like, you know how your nerves jangle when you're in a state of fear? I'd feel that for 2 hours every day. I made a goal just to feel it. And in the process, memories would come up and I would then be able to process the memories. And when the memories came up, some of my fear dissipated. So I had a lot of fear about torture and abuse and other things like that based on my first century life and memories. And so I had to go through them. So I went through all of those memories. And in the process, my fear diminished. My terror of emotion diminished as well. And the more I became confident in myself that I could handle emotion, the more emotion I could handle. It's sort of like a snowball gathering. So right at the beginning I was like incredibly afraid and terrified, while at the same time very detuned from the terror, very insensitive to it. And then as time went on, what happened was I became more and more in tune with it. I started to feel it in my body, to the point where I could every day for a couple of hours just feel my terror and also go through memories that caused that terror to exist, to the point where those memories went. I experienced them rather than holding on to them, and as a result, the terror diminished. Does that make sense?
It does. It's just like one complication, one big complication. Like if I don't want to do that, so to say. So I have to force myself. I have to kind of like, doing the good thing is something that is a should. There's a should attached to that. I should be doing that.
Yeah, now this is a very good statement you made. I don't want to do it. Yeah. Very important to recognise these statements. I don't want to. So let's look at I don't want to, shall we? What am I really saying?
Shouldn't have to.
Yeah, it's sort of, I shouldn't have to is sort of like an extension of that, isn't it? I shouldn't have to. Yeah. But really, what's I don't want to? Is it a sad state? Is it a lacking in confidence state? Is it it's an angry state. Okay. So really, I don't want to is anger. Okay, so basically you're saying I'm angry about having to.
Yes.
Yes? So anger is the feeling. I'm angry about having to. What's the purpose of anger?
Actually, many things. One thing is like the loneliness coming up when I stop, so to say, certain addictions, or like, thinking, planning, whatever. When I just stop, one of the first things coming up is like loneliness, just emptiness.
Okay, so what's the purpose of anger really, if we look at it, is to gain power over other feelings, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so when you say to yourself, I don't want to, it's sort of a very gentle expression of anger, isn't it? Yeah, instead of going, I'm in a bloody rage and I can't, instead of feeling the passion of your rage about it, I don't want to is just, I don't want to. Like it's almost like a misrepresentation of the level of rage, isn't it, in a way? Yeah. Firstly, obviously, you're going to have to connect to some of this anger somehow, right? Now, not for the purpose of keeping it, but for the purpose of recognising it and its purpose. See, the purpose of anger is to get some power over something else, over something you're scared of, something you're terrified of. Yeah, that's the purpose of the anger. So, unless I start seeing the relationship between anger and my sin of trying to get power over other emotions, unless I recognise the purpose of anger, I'm going to feel very justified to keep on doing it. And if I keep on doing it, nothing's going to change. Right? So I need to start seeing that anger is a fruitless emotion. as well. At some point, I need to recognize that.
Well, it gives me something, like, there's something I can do, actually. I'm not just like being overwhelmed or taken over by some outer force, so to say.
Yep.
I'm not just being a slave and servant.
Yeah, but it's interesting you keep saying, remember that was your false belief about God. God doesn't want you to be his servant or his slave. He wants you to be a self-responsible, self-actualized individual. But your false belief, which is he wants me to be his slave, is actually really your anger telling you a false belief so that you don't have to feel, so you can feel power over your terror.
Right.
So you keep mentioning the false belief, but in your heart you know it's a false belief, right?
I hope it's wrong, otherwise I just have to kill myself or whatever. I hope really, if I'm living in a hostile universe, of course, there's no point of existing. So there's why I'm torn,
Of course, yeah. And again, another false belief that we're living in a hostile universe, right? I understand it, but can you see that also comes from your childhood?
I figure yes. Yeah, must have.
It's got to come from your childhood, because how would you learn that we're living in a hostile universe and somebody else learns that they're living in a friendly one? Obviously, there's got to be something unique to your experience that that person hasn't had, right? Yeah. So the reality is the belief that we live in a hostile universe is supportive of the anger that allows you to have power over the terror you feel about just surrendering to the feelings that you had in your childhood about it being a hostile universe. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in other words, I've got to surrender to the belief that it was when I was a child in order to experience that feeling that I had as a child. And then as I release that, I will come to see that it's not a hostile universe. Right? Now, if I don't want to do that, I've got to look at, why do I want to hold on to the idea it's a hostile universe? Right? And there's reasons, isn't there? And every one of those reasons is giving me power over things I don't want to do. It makes me feel like I shouldn't have to do it. I shouldn't have to do this emotional thing. I shouldn't have to go to my sadness in particular. I shouldn't have to feel some of these feelings from my childhood, as an example. I should be able to sin because it's a hostile universe. You've got to sin in a hostile universe. This is how you cope with a hostile universe, is you give it back as much as it gives you. These beliefs prevent you from understanding that the I don't want to is really a situation of anger, which is really power over a whole heap of emotion that you haven't wanted to feel and feel you shouldn't have to feel. And in fact, many people do feel that God is asking too much of them, in the sense that God's asking you to feel emotion you shouldn't have to feel. But the answer to that is, it's in you. And if you don't feel it's going to kill you. Right? So it's better out of you than in you. Right? But most people don't believe that. They believe it's better to store emotion, even though eventually it kills them. They'd rather store it than feel it. So at some point, there's going to have to be some different decisions. And at the moment, you're very much gravitating to the decision to have power over your feelings rather than be humble to them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And in the process of wanting power over your feelings, you're going to create a set of beliefs that support your power over feelings, which includes belief about God, belief about the universe, hostile, belief about God, unkind, punishing, belief, all of which are not true, but they support your power over some hard feelings. Okay?
Yes, I think I don't want to get into that situation of being, what's the word, taken over, or overwhelmed
Yeah, you keep saying that, and it's interesting. That must have happened in your childhood for you to keep saying that.
And for you to feel that God's going to have power over you when you feel,
Yeah.
which is a theme, you know, obviously there's issues in your childhood relating to power.
And people having
emotion.
power over you.
Yeah.
And people taking power over you. People wanting you to be submissive to them.
Well,
Otherwise you wouldn't keep saying the same words all
Yeah,
the time.
my basic feeling is like, I'm food. I'm just a function. I have to function, otherwise I'm whatever.
Yeah.
It's not about me, and it's
can you
very
just hold the mic a little closer?
Oh, yeah, sure. Even my will to exist, so to say, like, is flawed, or like, is how can I say, it's, how can I say, taken over, like, I have to exist for someone, for, if you will, my mom or whatever, like, just.
Yeah.
But see how, just can I say, it's very clear the way you're distancing yourself from your childhood experience, even in this conversation, and wanting, this is a very common thing that people do. It's God, it's God's laws that are creating this feeling of being
It's obviously about your mother, right?
But you are deferring it onto God because that's preferable to you. Even the way you say it, it's like, oh, well, if you want to say it, it's mum, but that's not somewhere I'm going. It's God's problem.
Yeah.
Actually, to me, it's a combination because, like, who allowed the whole thing, who created the whole thing, like that.
Yes.
This is another disassembling.
It's a
that we do.
disassembly. Yeah, it's a very common method.
Yeah.
But really, what you're saying is, mum and dad.
Yeah. Well.
Mum and dad did some things, right? And particularly with this attitude that you feel, which is, I'm living for them, for their sake. That I'm just for them, and that is exactly the feeling they have, right? But you would rather blame it on God than feel your pain about them, right? And this is creating power over the emotion you have with them by blaming God for what they did. So in other words, your mum and dad chose to sin. In their sin, they damaged you. God gave them free will, so it's all God's fault.
That's my logic, yes.
Yeah. But if God didn't give them free will, or you free will, then you would not understand what self-awareness is. You wouldn't be a self-aware being. You would also not be able to feel happiness ever. You would not be able to feel any emotion ever if God never gave you free will. You'd just be like a robot. So at the end of the day, the gift of free will is necessary in order for you to experience joy. But the trouble with the gift of free will, you could say, if there is a trouble, is that humans use it badly. So who are you going to blame for humans using badly? Are you going to blame humans, which are the actual cause of them using it badly, or God? Now, it's very easy to blame God because it gets you away from working through your issues with humans.
And two issues it gets you away with. How other people use their will to harm you,
And
then how you are going to use your will
to harm others.
To harm others or to deal with the harm that was done. When we do, oh God, that's a crappy system, we blame God, we do two things. We deny the responsibility of our parents and what that effect that had on us. But we also deny responsibility for our choice to now deal with that and do better ourselves.
Yeah. So it gets you to have power over your feelings so much that in the end you distance yourself from your feelings completely through the beliefs that have been constructed. And this is a very dangerous thing to do because in that place you'll end up sinning a lot. And in the process of sinning a lot, you're going to find the law is quite strict about your sins, right? Just as, by the way, the law is strict about your mum and dad's sins, right? They are going to be corrected for their sins towards you, but if you keep doing this, you will also create many sins in your life as well, which of course you will then need to be corrected for as well. Yeah. So this is where it gets down to the fact that it's like, at the end of the day, God demands, the law demands that I feel my stuff. It demands it. And it's going to demand it whether you will like it or not. So at some point, you've got to reverse the construction of beliefs that support you avoiding and actually start imbibing beliefs that support you dealing. And you can do that because you've imbibed a whole heap of beliefs that support you avoiding, So that means you're capable of creating beliefs that support you doing something. So why not create a whole heap of beliefs that support you dealing? It would make sense, wouldn't it, that you also can do that. Yeah, and that's what I'd recommend you start doing. Yeah. Right. Shall we have a break for lunch now? Yep. All right.
So we'll come back at 2:15.
2:15?